Humans and human brains drive us towards war. We're going to have to get used to the fact that big wars could happen. We could fight another big war, and by a big war here I mean a war on the scale of World War II.
G'day, humans. Welcome to the safe space for dangerous ideas. Here's a dangerous idea for you. The most important object in the world is Xi Jinping's brain, because the psychological state of that brain, Xi Jinping's balancing of the upsides and downsides of invading Taiwan, is the most relevant factor in whether the world enters a cataclysmic global conflict. In fact, all wars, all conflict come down fundamentally to psychology, to prediction, to second guessing, to deterrence, to all kinds of mental games. Today's guest, Dr. Nicholas Wright, is a leading neuroscientist who advises the Pentagon. He also advises the UK Cabinet Office to help them with psychological strategy, game playing the psychology of their adversaries, thinking about how to understand their own psychological blind spots. And in an era of asymmetric warfare, of killer drones, of bunker-busting bombs, it's more important than ever to tease out the psychological games of strategic conflict. Why did France lose to the Nazis so quickly, despite having more tanks and more troops and more guns? How did Ukraine stand firm against Russia? Why was Winston Churchill right and Neville Chamberlain wrong? How do you know when you're wrong? How do you know if you can trust an ally? What's the logic of nuclear mutually assured destruction and deterrence, and does it still hold? How will technology shape the future of war? We get stuck into it all. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. The one and only Nicholas Wright. I am of an age where I was a child when the Cold War had ended, and so I just thought that wars were things that happened in the past. And then as I became an adult, of course, we have seen a number of wars, from Iraq to now Russia's invasion of Ukraine. What's going on, and why do people go to war?
I mean, well, there are two kind of separate questions there. So the first thing is, why are there more wars now than there were, say, 15, 20 years ago? And certainly more wars where other people seem to be doing things to people who are a bit more like us, basically. You know, in some ways, Iraq, Afghanistan, those were wars where we chose, in some ways at least, certainly to stay there for as long as we did. And the reason for that is that after the end of the Cold War, the United States in particular, but the West more broadly, was overwhelmingly militarily superior, had overwhelming military superiority, and that is just simply no longer the case. The West is no longer as secure as it once was, and as a consequence, there are simply more wars because more people can now get what they wanted to do anyway, which was, take things by force, and now they can actually do that.
What is the change in that superiority? Is it a lack of investment on the part of the West, or is it the rise of cheaper forms of warfare for smaller players, or are you talking about China?
So, I mean, it's partly it's strategy. So, I mean, humans are always creative. So, if the first thing to say is that, the way that the West fought wars, inevitably people don't just go, do you know what? They're really good at that. So I think what we'll do is we'll just keep on coming at them in exactly the same way so they can mow us down. That's not what people do. War is an area in which you need creativity. And so other countries learned how to counter the types of capabilities that the West has. They were creative and thoughtful about it.
I'm sorry, Nick. I'm just losing you completely audio-wise. I don't know what's going on. But as you, the longer you talk, the quieter and quieter you get. Jono, can you just come in and troubleshoot that?
Yeah.
Are you hearing that, or?
I'm completely fine.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So,
is it could it be the cans? But it's quite a consistent, like with each 10 to 20 to 30 seconds, it could just get softer and softer.
Try another set.
It seems like there's an auto thing that's coming in, and could I be loud enough that it's privileging my background hum over his?
It shouldn't be.
If you turn down my input or something? Sorry, Nick, this hasn't happened before.
No,
but we're in a slightly
no
different
worries.
studio. So,
Yeah.
well, I can always hear him. It's
Yeah.
just that over the course of a minute, it gets softer and softer and softer. Sorry, you're going to have to start reciting poetry again now.
That's all right. I mean, it's just the same one, really. But
Go for it.
In what deeps and in what skies burn the fire of thine eyes? Why? Oh, dearie me, I've forgotten a lot of the rest of the poem now. And did he who make the lamb make thee? In
Now
what
he's
deeps
gone
and in what
completely.
skies burn the fire of thine eyes?
Now he's back.
Or I could do Ozymandias.
Oh yeah, that's much louder. Yes, and I am partial to Ozymandias.
Okay,
Much
so
better.
I once met a
Yeah.
traveller from an antique land who said two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Nearby, half sunk, a shattered visage lies. The wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell of somebody. Is this enough, or do you need me to?
I was just enjoying it by now. I was waiting till you got to the Ozymandias quote on the statue.
Yeah, I am Ozymandias, king of kings. Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair. And the lone and level sand stretch far away, apparently. And I'm actually going to Egypt because it's Ramesses, I think, is Ozymandias, and I'm going to Egypt this winter.
Oh, how fabulous! Have you been?
Well, I've never been. I'm really excited.
Great.
Yeah, there we go. Sorry, you were very loud there. There we go.
Oh, okay. I went to Egypt with a lovely friend of mine who's a Brit, also a Brit, who is also a journalist who works for the Wall Street Journal and is fascinated in all such things. Before the Arab Spring, just before the revolution, and then found myself on a subsequent trip not long thereafter in Tahrir Square while everything was going down and Egyptian fighter jets were flying overhead, and I almost got kidnapped by Islamists and was rescued by a kindly Egyptian student who chaperoned me back to my hotel. And thereafter, because I was living in the States at the time, I spent the next 5 years being flagged for secondary security screening every time I entered the US.
Yeah.
So every time I left the US, I would have to come back in and factor in that there were going to be 4 hours sitting under fluorescent lights in a waiting room while they checked why I was in Egypt during the Tahrir Square demonstrations.
I mean, although again, not totally unreasonable.
Completely reasonable.
Yeah.
I was an idiot.
Yeah.
But there you go. So sorry.
No, you were just an adventurer.
Exactly, that's right. I know, but foreign 20-something individual, wandering alone through Egypt at the peak of the...
Well, I mean, I had a friend who I was at medical school with, and when she was in her early 20s, she and another female friend, just two medical students from London, travelled through Syria, Assad, Syria. This was in just 2000-ish. And it was very safe because they didn't want anything to happen to Western medical students traveling through Syria.
Dictatorships can be safe when they want to be.
Yeah, I'm sure North Korea has some wonderful beaches, as we've heard in the last few years.
Let's not get carried away. But yes. Yeah.
So, right, why are there so many wars? So the gist is, to cut to the chase, so why are there so many wars? I'll keep it really simple. Humans and human brains drive us towards war. But for a long time, people couldn't fight wars against the United States and its allies, certainly not very easily, because they would simply be beaten, right? So they didn't fight wars, right? Russia was in no state to fight a war against somewhere like Ukraine. But that's changed. The world has changed. Now we are no longer materially superior. It is very unlikely we're going to be materially superior again in the near future. Certainly it seems unlikely for the next few decades. And as a consequence of that, we're going to have to get used to the fact that big wars could happen. We could fight another big war. And by big war here, I mean a war on the scale of World War II.
But just to lean into the psychological question of it that you address in your book, it can't be true materially that Russia was not in a position to beat Ukraine prior to 2022. I mean, Russia was incredibly powerful all the way from the 50s up until today, right? I mean, and its military could have vanquished a small country like Ukraine. Not that Ukraine existed back then, but at any point since the end of the Cold War, couldn't Russia have beaten Ukraine?
No. So at the end of the Cold War, I mean, it's very important to remember how badly Russia did at the end of the Cold War. right? I mean, Russian life expectancy went down between the mid-80s to the mid-90s by, I can't remember how many, like 8 years or so. I put the figures in the book, right? I mean, they really lost, and they lost catastrophically. The Russian state ceased to function in important ways, right? Unemployment went from 0% to about 30%. It was a deeply troubled society in which where they couldn't. When I was my dad, for some ludicrous reason, thought he'd take his children on a railway trip in Eastern Europe in 1919. So we were there. I was there as a small child, and you could literally buy, and I did. You could buy Russian. I had a Russian officer's fur hat, right? Because the Russian troops are just selling their Soviet belts and hats and gloves and whatever you want.
Have you still got it?
Literally at the side of the street. Sadly, it did not stand the test of time. And I got it out of the drawer one year, and I was like, this become a completely bald hat.
You mean quality Soviet material engineering was not up to scratch?
Oh, the thing is, so look, at the end of World War II in the 1950s, the Soviets had just beaten what was the best land army in the world, which was the German army. And it gives me no pleasure to say that the Germans were the best army in the world, but they were the best land army in the world. They were better than the British. They were better than the Australians. They were better than the Americans. They were better than the Russians, right? They were simply very, very good. And the Russians beat them, right? The Russians had no choice. Soviet Russia beat the Germans. They were very good, right, at Blitzkrieg. By the end of World War II, the Russians were extremely good, and they outfought the Germans. Now, they were very good, but right, the nature of war always remains the same, right? And the reason why the nature of war always remains the same is that war is, like, by definition, war is politically motivated violence between human groups at scale. That's what war is. It's always about human on human. But the character of war will always change, right? So new technologies, new ways of organizing your society, all of these things will change. And so you have to keep reinventing your military, otherwise you're going to lose. Right? You have to remember things like the will to fight. If you don't have the will to fight, you're not going to be able to succeed. But you have to keep reinventing how you do things to take advantage of new technologies. Now, at the end of the Cold War, to get back to your question, the Russians were they were a country in collapse in crucial ways. They had no capability to marshal their tanks, physical tanks, and get them anywhere. Right? And that was the problem with Russia. But Russia rebuilt. Vladimir Putin is a nasty man, right? But Vladimir Putin is a very capable man, and he has rebuilt a lot of Russian capabilities and put Russia in a position where it can now invade countries along its borders.
Hey, humans, putting your pants on is a lot like using a VPN. It keeps your private stuff private, and if you don't get around to doing it before you need to, you find yourself unexpectedly exposed. Hallelujah! Surfshark VPN is giving you 4 extra months of their military-grade encryption at surfshark.com/JoshS, or you can use the code JoshS at checkout. Without a private virtual network, you are a sitting duck for snoopers and trackers and identity theft and fraud, especially on public Wi-Fi, which I use quite a lot at libraries and at airports and such, which is one reason I use Surfshark VPN. That's not the only reason, though, the privacy stuff. Speaking of airports, you should take a look at what happens when you turn on Surfshark VPN and you start browsing flights and hotel reservations from different regions. There are location-based price differences. Hotels and airlines and travel booking sites offer different prices to different countries. And with Surfshark VPN, you can be wherever you want to be, regardless of where you are. A Surfshark VPN also enables you to stream your favorite shows or access websites that are geo-blocked from the region you're actually in. With Surfshark, you can break through all the online barriers and access content from all over the world. So don't let online threats catch you off guard. Take control of your online security with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Go to surfshark.com/JoshS or use the code JoshS at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN and secure your digital life. So when you talk about the will, there's an interesting parallel that you make in the book between Ukraine in 2022 through to today and France in World War II. France is caricatured by the more unkind allies in America as cheese-eating surrender monkeys because they folded so quickly in World War II, when in actual fact, it's a more complicated picture. But why was it so easy for Hitler to? What was the military position and situation and capability of France at the beginning of World War II, and why does that not align with our recollection of what happened to them in contrast to what's going on in Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, we forget this now because obviously we then saw Hitler take over so much of Europe. I mean, there was virtually none of it left other than Britain in the West and the Soviet Union in the East. But on May the 9th, 1940, there were two armies facing each other. There was the Nazi Germans on one side, and there was Britain and France defending France on the other side. And the Allies, the British and the French, we had more trained men, more guns, more tanks, and more planes, right? And yet, the Germans cut through extremely quickly. Now, they did that partly because they were better, right? And again, it gives me no pleasure to say that. They were better at using the technologies of their time and combining those with key psychological factors, like they were able to make faster decisions, to communicating more effectively, having better ways of leading their troops, and so their troops could then make decisions more flexibly, right, and more creatively to achieve the goals they wanted to achieve. And they also used shock, surprise, skill, and daring much more effectively than the Allies. And unfortunately, that meant that they created an opening, very rapidly. But then the key reason why Hitler's cavalry was clattering up the Champs-Élysées in a victory parade less than 7 weeks after the German tanks started rolling, right? Less than 7 weeks. And the reason why that happened so quickly was that French will to fight collapsed. Right, and so enormous numbers of French troops surrendered. Now, you're absolutely right. Why did that happen? There are many factors. Partly that a lot of the key troops who faced the Germans were some of the poorest trained French troops. More broadly, whilst the Germans trained furiously in the opening months of the war, the French did not train very much at all. Right, and training is crucial because training turns what is a terrifying and fearful environment into one that is, yes, still fearful, but one that you can be managed. And for a wide variety of factors, the French will to fight collapsed. And as a consequence of that, it was in many ways that defeat of France was a key turning point, possibly even the key turning point in the whole of 20th century history.
I was thinking about how that must have felt, Nick, when I was reading it and trying to recall the fact that everything was quite recent at the time that this happened. Like, we think of World War II because it was so cataclysmic and such a pivotal turning moment in world history as this standalone event. But if you were French, the Napoleonic Wars were as recent as the Beatles are to us. And World War, right, like 60-odd years or something. I mean...
Well, what? No, that it was 100 years. Napoleonic Wars ended in 1815. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yes. I'm getting my 1800s mixed up. Just going back in time from like 1939. So World War I, for a start, had happened during the Obama administration for us. Right, it was that recent.
Yeah, 2008. So 17 years ago. Well, it happened. So it ended in 1918. So just over. So it was like George
W. Bush to exactly.
George W. Bush. It was like World War I had happened during George W. Bush.
I mean, and you've had this incredible victory, and you've squeezed the Germans to the end of their lives at Versailles, and you probably feel somewhat indomitable, and then in a matter of weeks they annihilate you. And so is it the surprise? Is it yes, you've mentioned training, but is it akin to what we felt after 9/11, where it was like a rupture in the psyche of what's possible that sort of demoralizes the French spirit?
I think there are two factors. One is the Germans were very good and they were also lucky. So in fact, the original German plan they had for what became the attack on France, the plans got captured, and so they had to change their plan at the last minute and come up with a different plan, the attack to the Ardennes. So they were lucky, but the Germans were also just much better at planning, right? So the Germans were much better at planning. So they war gamed a lot of situations. So, like for example, so last year's Nobel Prize winner in AI, a chap called Demis Hassabis, and he and I shared an office together when he was researching brain at Queen Square in London, where I work. And Demis did his PhD. His research was on a part of the brain called the hippocampus that is very involved in memory and in using those memories to imagine new futures. Right, so our brain is about imagining and simulating new futures. And what the Germans are very good at doing was wargaming, simulating new features, and then adapting much more rapidly, thinking up new things and then adapting much more rapidly than the Allies were, unfortunately. Another thing that is really important is people often rely on technology. Right, technology is important, but what was the point of the Maginot Line? Right, we laugh about the Maginot Line now, but the Maginot Line was seen as the Maginot Line was. I'm sure you remember, or a lot of the listeners will remember, like World War I was lots of series of trenches, right? Lots of trenches, and it was horrible, right? Really awful. So what they thought is, what we'll do instead is we'll build an industrial version of that, right? So they built a huge set of fortifications, a line of fortifications, and there were, gun turrets, and there were, cinemas and air conditioning and cafeterias and little underground trains and all the rest of it, right? They were like, this time we're going to have this impenetrable line, the Maginot Line. And it was seen as a technological marvel of the time, right? Hugely expensive.
Where did it run, Nick?
I beg your pardon?
Where did it run? Where was the line?
And it ran along the border between France and Germany. Now, for political reasons, it didn't cover the border like between France and Belgium, right? Key parts of Belgium. That was for difficult political reasons, which I'm not going to go into. But kind of long story short, the Germans went round the Maginot Line. So the Maginot Line was just
How did the French not see this? Didn't they do that in World War One? Am I misremembering my von Schlieffen plan or something? Where didn't the Germans come around the top in World War One?
They did, and in fact, here this time they came through a slightly different bit, the Ardennes, which was thought to be these forests that were thought to be impenetrable, right, to motorized vehicles. But the French basically, what they wanted to do is the French. So, I mean, it's very important to remember that there were hundreds of thousands of the dead in France is about 1.5 million, right, in World War One, and there were hundreds of thousands of orphans, right, hundreds of thousands of invalids. It was an absolute catastrophe.
And how big is it? What's the population of France at the time, Nick? Do you know?
That is a good question. I would estimate something like 40-odd million. So this is a lot.
If it's like 60-ish now or something, then it's probably
it's about 67 million now.
Ago.
Yeah. So France did not. They wanted to substitute technology for manpower. Right, that's what they wanted to do. But the problem is the Germans were prepared to fight and fight very hard. They weren't prepared to. They wanted to use technology, but not substitute technology for manpower. And as a consequence of that, they were able to cut through the French, drive around the French, drive much harder, surprise the French, and outwit the French. And unfortunately, that's exactly what they did. And it's just very important when you remember now that if you look at a lot of what we're trying to do on the eastern flank of Europe now, again, what people are talking about is there'll be a drone wall, right? We don't want to send our boys to go and fight over there because there'll be the drone wall, there'll be technology, there'll be missiles. But the thing is that war will always come down in the end to people who are prepared to fight, and people who are prepared to risk their own lives, and they have the will to stand, and people who are also prepared to kill others, right? And that's what war will always end up coming down to. And any group of people who are not prepared to defend themselves, they will make easy pickings for those who are prepared to attack them.
Why do you say it will always come down to that? Because there's a lot of wiggle room in that claim. It may be true that at the end of the day, somebody's going to have to stand up if the shit really hits the fan. But as military sophistication improves, there's an obvious, we've seen the sort of asymmetry of warfare where a drone operator sitting in a bunker in Nevada can be, operating a drone that's high over the mountains of Waziristan in, northern Pakistan or Afghanistan, and they can blow a village out to smithereens with the press of a button. That person doesn't need to have skin in the game, and the bar of how much skin you need to put in the game gets lower and lower, such that maybe yes, at the end of the day, when you're being invaded, everyone's going to have to stand up and fight. But isn't there an expansion of the capacity for bloodless warfare as technology improves? Bloodless on one side, at least.
I wish that were the case, but unfortunately, I mean, you could make exactly the opposite claim, and I think that opposite claim would actually be reasonable. So you look at World War I, for example. World War I was industrialized warfare, barbed wire, machine guns. What is a machine gun? A machine gun is like the essence of rifle fire, the essence of an infantry, right? That's what a machine gun is. It's mechanized firepower, right? So, and that, killed people enormously more efficiently and effectively, which is not necessarily a good thing, than was able to be done before. Now, I completely agree with you that as we now get to, so you look at World War II. So what was Hitler's first major defeat? What was Hitler's first major defeat? Hitler's first major defeat was the Battle of Britain, right? And the Battle of Britain was essentially a war or a battle of dueling technologists, right? You had a relatively small number, about 2,500 pilots in the RAF, mostly British, but also Australian, Canadian, New Zealanders, Poles, and so on, Czechs. Against a similar number in, more, right, in the Luftwaffe. So you had dueling technologists, right, and then the air control and support systems that enabled the RAF, for example, to detect adversary, enemy fighters and bombers and take them on. Now that is true, and I think in the future what we'll end up with is dueling technologists, where it will be swarm upon swarm of drones. And there will be dueling technologists in control of these swarms of drones. We can talk about what AI means and why it will happen and how humans can potentially control those swarms of drones and so on. But I think you're absolutely right. And in addition to that, if you think about, I think you're sitting in Australia now. What is the most likely war Australia is going to get pulled into? Serious war in the near future. It is a contingency over Taiwan, right? A US-China contingency over Taiwan in which the Australians will get involved, right? Now, there is no war game that I am aware of where many thousands of US service personnel on a variety of different ships and different types of platforms don't get killed, right? When that type of war really takes off. And if the Australians are involved, there will be a lot of Australians who will die as well in the Navy, Marines, and so on and so forth. That it's given me absolutely no pleasure to say, but that is what will happen, right? And so, yes, potentially in the future, we'll get to a point where it will be drones upon drones. But even then, why will people not attack, if they can, the drone bases, right? Why will they not be attacking the forward drone controllers? Because people are jamming other things, right? Right now, the drones in Ukraine, a key Russian technology now is drones that are connected by fiber optic cable, right? Because they can't be jammed, right? Which means you have to physically be relatively close to the Ukrainian front lines. Right?
Wait, the drones are connected to each other via fiber optic cable, or to the controller on the ground via fiber optic cable?
A controller.
Amazing.
So first-person view drones are amazing. I don't give a flown one. I bought one for my son, actually. You can buy them for really cheaply, and you can just literally get them anywhere these days. And the reason they're so good is that you kind of sit in the drone and you basically look out the front of the drone. You can fly this drone around, right? And it's very intuitive.
What are you looking at? What's on the screen? Is it on your phone or?
It will just be whatever the camera of the drone is looking at. So normally it's me looking at myself in a park in London.
Yes, but what are you looking at while you're standing in the park? Where are you seeing the drone's POV from?
So I'm looking down at the handset. So I put my mobile phone on top of the drone controller, and I'm looking at my phone. I'm sure there's more sophisticated things when you get to the level.
I'm looking for my 3D visor, like my headset, where I have a full range view of me just.
If you want to buy my son a fancier drone using all of your podcast money, I'm more than happy for you to buy him a fancier drone. But with my now, when I'm the one buying him the drone, he's going to get like a cut price drone.
Okay, fair enough.
And also, we've already crashed the drone and broken bits.
Of course, you have. So there's a fiber optic cable linking.
And so, but those are jammed because the drone has to be connected to the controller using electronic warfare, right? And using electromagnetic communication, right? So waves, right? Electromagnetic waves.
Yeah.
And of course those can be jammed. So now, in Ukraine, you got to this crucial thing. So you and I are looking at each other right now using vision, ultimately, right? That's how my eyes are getting right, light waves. But actually, sharks, for example, detect electrical fields. Right, there are lots of other things that we could sense in the world other than the particular senses that we happen to have, and those types of things are actually used in Ukraine. So people will try and find others' command and control nodes, right? So places with lots of computers because of the signatures, the electromagnetic signatures they have, and then you can destroy them, right? Equally, you can jam communication between the drone controller and the drone. So that's why you now have distributed command centers, right? It's not like Afghanistan or whatever, where you'd have like a big camp with all the British and the Americans and the Australians in there. That's not how you do it anymore. You can't do that.
Right. So just to drill down on that, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. It is already the case that technology in the form of cheap drones has revolutionized the geographical map of warfare just since Afghanistan and Iraq, in the sense that if you had a big central command Bagram Air Force Base or something like that in the 2020s, the Taliban would just swarm drones over it and blow the shit out of it. It's
not clear that the Taliban would be capable of doing that. But certainly, this is the thing.
Iran could if they wanted
ultimately, the types of wars that people were involved in Afghanistan and Iraq, once Saddam Hussein's ground forces were defeated, right, he had a reasonably capable military. He had a military equivalent to the Chinese. At the time of the first Gulf War, and this is one of the reasons why the Chinese were so terrified of the American military, is at the time of the first Gulf War, Saddam Hussein's military was pretty capable. It was large, was reasonably well equipped. It was an excellent Cold War, early Cold War military, equivalent to what the Chinese had. And basically the Americans and the British and the French who were with them and others cut through them extremely effectively. Right, through a lot of it was better technology, but also better planning. Right, and better decision making. Now, that type of advance, right now, so for a long time, no really sizable military would stand up against the United States, but that is just no longer the case. Now, when you're talking about great powers going into competition, so a great power is a country like China or Russia or the United States, right, or Germany or Japan. Great powers, or Britain or France, great powers, when they go to war with each other, they bring a huge greater number of capabilities. And wars between great powers very often go on for years, right? World War II for Australia or for Britain went on for almost 6 years. For China, World War II went on for 8 years, right? Because it started earlier for China than it did for Britain or Australia. It goes on for years. Right, and World War I went on for 4 years, right?
And these are pretty short wars in comparison to 21st century wars.
Right?
I mean,
Iraq, the thing is that
Afghanistan.
The thing is those weren't. I mean, it's impolitic to say, but I mean, ultimately, after the first Gulf War, by the time you get, and even in the 2003 invasion, after that, it was, to all intents and purposes, a counterinsurgency policing operation.
Right. If you just count the Iraq War up until George W. Bush flies onto an aircraft carrier with his enormous codpiece and says mission accomplished, then it's a pretty quick campaign.
Yeah, I mean, but because also by that point they'd been starved of spare parts for all of their machines since the first Gulf War, right? And they just didn't have a functioning, capable military by that point.
But just to clarify, Nick, the point quickly about asymmetric warfare and the relevance of hardware versus psychology, I just want to make the point that, is it true when I was saying that an increase in military capacity can lead to less bloodshed on the side that has the military capability? I guess my assumption was that you're fighting someone who doesn't have an equivalent military capability. So the machine gun example does cause less bloodshed for the person with the machine gun because they can kill 100 people, assuming that the other guy doesn't have the machine gun, right? So I'm just sort of noting the possible temptation that great powers might have to wage wars against smaller or insurgent adversaries, thinking that they're going to be bloodless. And am I right in assuming that the point that you're making is it rarely goes according to plan perfectly, and at the end of the day, if things can escalate, they may escalate, And at the end of the day, the bottom line is that you're going to cash out the value of the war in blood and lives, probably not just in robots.
I think it's something slightly different. So I think the key thing to remember is that Iraq and Afghanistan are small countries that were not very capable societally or technologically, right? If America and China went to war, right? Or, for example, as you see now with Ukraine, which is a population of about 50 odd million against Russia, 150 odd million, and reasonably technology capable countries, both of them, that is just very different to anything that it's just very different, right? When you're talking about great power wars, and this is what, like, if Australia gets dragged into a Taiwan contingency, a war over Taiwan, that is going to be a really big deal. Right? Now, the thing is that, say, for example, that the Americans lose in the first 30 days of the war and China then gets the whole of Taiwan, right? Well, the Americans just say, do you know what, guys? You beat us there. Fair enough. I think we'll just leave it as it is. Right? Well done. Well done, you. No, of course they're not going to say that, right? Now, it's not certain what they'll do, but those types of wars often go on for years. Right, they become prolonged wars. Now, once you get prolonged wars between great powers, that then entire new classes of machines and capabilities are invented. Right, there were no nuclear weapons at the beginning of World War II. There were nuclear weapons at the end of World War II. Right, what the types of drones and swarms of drones people are going to be using by the end of a major China-US war are going to be very different and far more capable than those used at the beginning. And how we use them, how humans will be able to control them, that will often determine. You need to build them and you need to control them well. And if we're not able to control them well, if we're not able to use our brains well, decide faster and better than the adversaries, then we're not going to be able to win. And the thing to remember about, and again, forget to some extent Afghanistan and Iraq. Those were essentially large-scale policing operations, right? And that's in no way belittling all of the people who bravely risked their lives to go and do this stuff. But that is nothing. That's like the Boer War compared to World War I, right? Or even the Spanish Civil War compared to World War II, right? It's just an order of magnitude, 2 orders of magnitude, 3 orders of magnitude bigger. And that's something we've forgotten a lot about in the West, but we no longer have the luxury of forgetting about that.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention, not to be dark, but the disruption to global trade that we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, if you multiply that by 100 because China is blockading Australia and we only have about 2 months worth of fertilizer in Australia, even though we're an incredible agricultural powerhouse, we haven't bothered to stockpile anything that we need. I think we need a few weeks of fuel. Yeah. It's like there's insane reliance on the shipping lanes of the South China Sea being open. So that's a whole other kettle of fish that we don't have to go into, quite apart from the military horrors of being at war. So since you raised Taiwan and this dark vision of my Antipodean future, you make the point in the book that the most important object, I think you say the most important brain, but I like the idea of the most important object in the world being Xi Jinping's brain, because that is the object that is probably the most consequential item in determining how the next few decades go. And one way of framing the question about how to deal with China and how to think about Taiwan is, are we currently at a moment before World War I or are we at a moment before World War II? What do you mean by that analogy?
So this is one of the...
G'day, humans! Well, if you've listened to this much of the episode, then you must enjoy it, presumably, unless you're just listening for masochistic reasons. So you should listen to the rest of it. And the way you do that is by subscribing to the premium feed, where you not only get to hear the rest of this delightful conversation, and trust me, it gets better than what you just heard, but you also get to hear no ads, 0 ads. And previously, up until now, you had to go to the old Substack to do that and follow me on Substack and add one more platform to your life if you're not already on Substack. But here's the thing. We are now on Apple Premium Podcast as well. So with one click, Apple will just subscribe you up to the premium feed. You'll be able to listen to the rest of this conversation right now. So open up your Apple Podcasts, click the old Pay Old Zepsy button. That's probably what it's called, Pay Old Zepsy. And you click the button and then you no longer have to be a free rider. you can feel like you're contributing to the mission of this show, which is really what we're all here for: better conversations, a freer, more freewheeling attitude towards the things that we can talk about, a way to steelman our opponents and to take the most gracious approach towards disagreement. That is what you're voting for when you vote for Uncomfortable Conversations by going into your Apple Podcasts and clicking subscribe. I love you. If you don't do that, that's fine. I'll see you the next free episode, I guess. Take care.